Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everyone. Welcome to Your Heart Magic. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, and here we are for episode 13. I know I always say I'm so excited about every topic that we talk about, but it's true, I am. And this one is no different. We are talking about the topic today of redefining significance. And I love this topic for so many reasons because we are going to be looking at it through a very personal lens of how to redefine significance in our lives in a way that we can work with our own issues around self-worth and confidence and self-esteem and really believing in ourselves. And this topic was inspired by something the Akashic Records said in our most recent podcast prior to this one, where we were talking about the Akashic Records on the year of 2023. So jumping into this with a collective overview right now. One of the things the record said was happening in the year 2023, which is called the evolution of the light. And we are the light. So we are part of what's changing and part of what's helping evolve the light. And part of what they said that was about was a mass redefinition of significance that is going on at this time. Now, in this particular reading, since it was for the collective, the record spoke to this coming through on multiple levels, from values around money and how that affects the economy, values around business, who we might give our business to as a business people or a potential professional, how we might choose to navigate our business or changes that people might be making in their business. This could have to do with where you want to live, what you want to do with your life. There has been a real awakening over the last few years where people are actively really thinking about, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What am I called to do? And so in this shift that's happening, in this spiritual awakening, and in this particular year, part of what is going on is this redefinition of significance. And I looked up the word significance, I typed it into Google just to see what came through. And the top definition from, I think it was dictionary.com, was the quality of being worthy of attention and importance, which is a beautiful definition of significance to me. That sounds very much like what significance is about. What do we give our attention to? What do we decide is worthy of our attention? How do we decide that something is significant? This is actually a really fun spiritual writing prompt. If you just want to sit down in your journal and write, what do I ascribe significance to? And really think about, what do you give your attention to? What feels important to you? And what's interesting about asking this question is, I think for many of us, we might find that what we give our attention to might not necessarily be something that is something that we feel is significant. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. We're going to talk about that a little bit and being in alignment with our values. But for now, something you might do for your own self-discovery is just make a significance list, just to have a sense of what is significant to you and what does it mean to you. And as we're going through this collective shift, which again is happening on a mass level, this is not just happening for those who might identify with the term light worker and empath and spiritually curious and on the spiritual path. This is happening for many people, many who might not identify at all with that terminology and might have different background, different belief system, very different way of working on the world. But one of the things, looking at the world. But one of the things that we all have in common is we are all human beings. We are all here together on this planet. And there are things that are happening that transcend belief systems right now. And some of those things are asking many people to really dig into their hearts and to ask questions of value and significance. So we're under the umbrella of this bigger shift. And as individuals undergoing that shift who are spiritually open, and for many of us, very actively trying to work our heart magic and work our light, will be experiencing our own shifts. And how are we redefining significance at this time? And how do we define our sense of value? And some of that is going to cause us to take action steps where we align with our values, but really the shift begins inside of us. It begins with us making decisions about whether it's valuing ourselves differently. And so that changes how we do something, or we shift a value system and decide to make a behavioral change that's more in alignment with that value shift. This is our inner work, and it's something that we get to work on in a very transformative way. And we're already engaged in this work. There's nothing in this podcast that's a to-do. I'm going to throw out some fun suggestions and things that you might do for your own personal discovery work, but you're already doing this work. There's probably things that are coming through that you might already relate to and say, yes, I have been shifting that. And I actually asked the angels for a quick kind of sense, like a little message on significance. I just said to the angels, what would you describe significance as? And I got just a very simple response. And they just said that which you assign value and meaning to. Very similar to dictionary.com, but they were the ones who used the word value, that which you assign value to. So what do we assign value to? If you look at society as a collective, and some of the things that we see on the level of kind of mass consciousness and cultural consciousness. Let me rephrase this a different way. If aliens and journeyers from another dimension were to travel down here and they were to walk around the planet for a while and just kind of take a survey course on, so what's this place about? What do the earthlings and the humans on this planet value? What are their culture like? Their cultures like? I think they would really get an eyeful. And I think that they might have some thoughts about this very extraordinary, diverse place, where we have so many beautiful things in our world and so many things that are very challenging and hard as well. I know that if you were to just pull a magazine off the rack in a store and open it up, it looks like what we value are things having to do with money and prestige and fame and stuff and all of those things. And there's nothing wrong with any of these things, but that is what a lot of emphasis has been placed on. So like, what do we really value? And I think that when we look at what is significance, many of us already know. We know the right answer, and the right answer isn't significance is to have a lot of money and be super famous and have a bunch of material goods. That's most people, I think, who are spiritually open would probably agree with something like that. Many people on the spiritual path might not be that attached to material possessions. And some people are very much on the path and say, no, I like nice things as well. And I'm spiritual. There's no right or wrong in this. This is just different paths. So we're not judging today. We're just exploring dialogue around these questions. But I think that many of us, if we actually talked about, well, what makes a significant life? Like, what makes a good life? What do you value in your life? What do you think, if you could leave this place and say, these are the things I hope to accomplish, this is the kind of person I hope to be, this is how I'd like to feel when I die. This is how I'd like to look back and feel about my life. What would you put on that list? What are your values? And our values often are not what is reflected back in mass consciousness. And in part, some of that is because mass consciousness has been created by many things that offer imitation light, some sense of false life, things that aren't really fulfilling and really aren't sustaining. And there is money and grabs for power that are often directing things like what gets a headline and how is that headline presented and what is marketed and what's being influenced on social media or something like that. When it comes to who's who and people that get recognition, how is that decided? Many individuals have experienced feeling like no matter what they do, like I know a lot of fellow creatives. I'm a creative, I'm a writer, among the other things that I do. And I know so many creatives who have like such beautiful work, writings and works of value, and they are trying to find a foothold and put their work out there and have their work received. And there's just so much flooded on the market right now, and just so much. Sometimes it comes down to who you know. And if you are not in the know, or you don't have those connections, or you don't have the resources to buy the kinds of promotion that you might need to try and achieve those connections, and you're really trying to do it from more of a grassroots organic place, it can be really challenging. And so it's very easy for somebody to say, my work doesn't matter. Look at how poorly it's performing, or feel really frustrated about that. And yet, in the eyes of spirit, I think a better way of evaluating our work and evaluating that is really to ask different questions. Am I doing what I love? Do I feel like what I have to say is significant? Are there wins that I can celebrate, even if I'm not where I'm at? Sometimes what looks to be significant is not a reflection of true significance, but it's a reflection of other things that allow somebody to get into a position that somebody else might not have access to. And that kind of brings me to one of the first points that I wanted to make today about the redefinition of significance, and that is valuing our values. And earlier, when I said, sit down and make a list of your values and write it out, this is a helpful thing to do, because we're going to use our little writer as an example. And if you haven't figured it out, this has 100% been me. I'm more than happy to get on this podcast and talk about things that I have struggled with too, and sometimes still struggling with. We are all in this together. And our work of working with hard feelings around this isn't to pretend like they're not there. It's just to be honest with them and to show up and do the work and work on transforming them. So this is something I've actively had to work on transforming in myself. And for me, here's some things that I value. I do value authenticity. I value trying to be my most authentic self. I value truth. And on a fundamental level, I work hard to speak truth in my own life. And when I realize that I'm not speaking truth somewhere, or something comes to my attention that I am not seeing as clearly or haven't said as clearly, I'm not thinking as clearly as I could have, I try and do my work around that. Never means I do it perfectly. It just means I try and do my work around that. I value creativity. I think that we are creative beings. We are on a creative planet. Our connection to the mysteries, to source creator, to however you want to think about those things, to spirit, is part of our creativity. Like when you think about the act of creation and things being created and us being a reflection of that creativity, we have that spark of creativity inside of us. So I value living creatively and living artistically, even if that doesn't always mean making like art. It's not really always about what we do. It's about our being and trying to engage in our lives in a creative way. And I value self-expression. I think self-expression is part of our heart magic. Who we are as unique, authentic individuals is what part of what we've been given to bring to the planet at this time. So if I look at those values and I evaluate any books I've written through that lens, then like I can value my own work. Everything I've written falls in line with those values to the best of my ability. Now, if I get caught up and I look at things like performance or numbers, or especially when I was first starting out and I knew nothing about publishing, really nothing about the process, I thought you published a book and you'd arrived. And like opportunities would roll in. I had no idea how hard you have to actually work to like continue to share your work, and that like writing the book and getting it out there is just part of it, that there's so much more that you can do as an active author or active writer. I had no idea at the time, and I really fell into those traps of using numbers or using I'm not doing as well as I expected to do, failing my own expectations, and really falling into that space of feeling like my work didn't matter or feeling like I didn't have something to say. And if we really look at this idea of redefining significance, I think one of the shifts that we are making right now is really shifting to a space where we know what we value. We work really hard to align with our internal values, and our work as people of the light is to see when we're buying into some form of an external validator that somebody else defined for us somewhere along the way. And we've just taken it as truth because that's the way the world works. And so I was really buying into this idea that if my book didn't do a certain way, the first book that I put out, then somehow I was failing, or I wasn't as successful, or, all the messages around that. And if I can really come back to that place of valuing my own values and use that as a compass to evaluate anything I put out into the world, no matter how successful it does in terms of quantity or numbers or any of those measurements, or how not successful it does in terms of those things, I am able to have a reference point, a compass inside of me where I can say, you know what? I am in alignment with who I'm trying to be in this world. This creation was in alignment with my values. And so I can choose to know that this was significant because it was aligned. So I think that part of the redefinition of significance is really being willing to like do our own work, and really being willing to dive into ourselves and challenge our value systems, not in a scary way or a daunting way, but just in a way of asking ourselves, well, where did this value come from? Is this heart driven? Does this feel spirit driven? Is this just something really meaningful to me? Not everything has to be some big, lofty spiritual thing. We can value something because it's really fun or we like it. Not everything has to be, there's not a right or wrong in this. Spirit's not out there with like a checklist being like good value. Oh, that's a bad value. I think there's things that help us align a little bit more with our spiritual path, and things that might bump us off of it a little bit more. But ultimately, that's what free will and freedom of choice and experimentation is all about. That is what making mistakes, like being a soul on a human journey, is about: experimenting, learning from mistakes, saying, well, I'm going to try this out over here, and realizing, well, that didn't work so great. Sometimes we figure out what we value by having spent time in something that we realize that wasn't for me. And here's why. Sometimes we have to have the counterpoint to something in order to better understand what the real deal is. So there's no like beating ourselves up here for anything that's on our value list. If somebody writes down, well, it's really important to me, I want to sell a lot of books, we'll go with the writer, because in this modern day world, that means success. There's nothing wrong with that. These are not bad things or bad goals to have, whatever it is that's on your list. But it really comes back to, well, why do I value that? And if it comes from a place of, well, I feel like my work is really meaningful and I really want people to read it. And I know that if I have a lot of sales, it means my work is reaching a lot of people and that would feel amazing. That's a real heart-driven place. That's really coming from a space of passion and a space of a dream inside of somebody. If the answer is, well, because then it means I'm successful and I'm famous, that might not be a well thought out place, or a place where I want to sell a lot of books because, it means I'm successful. Maybe take it a little bit deeper. Why is that successful? Who taught you that that was successful? Would that really feel successful to you? One of the universal truths that a lot of people talk about as they age and they get closer to, coming towards the end of their life is the wisdom that comes from, I wish I'd lived differently. I invested my time in things that mattered less. A lot of times people say you can't take it with you. The love inside of us, that's what goes with us. When we pass over onto the other side, we don't take anything with us. And even the accomplishments in this world, we might leave a legacy of light behind, but those don't go with us either. So it really comes back to just being willing to reflect on our value system and then valuing what we value, like actually being in alignment with that. And if you have, we'll say, a bad day, bad days happen to everybody. I've talked about this before. I call it exercises in being human. We are here to feel the whole range of human emotion. And since we're human beings, even if we're souls, we are on this human journey. We're not closed off to any human emotion. So we feel things that are really hard, like, depression or anxiety or fear or disdain or things spite. We feel all the hard stuff. And so if you just had one of those hard days, and at the end of the day, you say, well, this was a bad day. Nothing good happened. I cannot get myself in a place of light. I can't choose the light today. I tried. I'm going to press reset. Maybe I blew it today. Maybe it was one of those days and you look back and you say, oh my gosh, I lost my temper, or I did this, or I didn't do the thing that I need to do. Whatever that is, if you can just check in with yourself and say, well, am I at least just being honest with myself about where I'm at? Yes, I am. And maybe you say, are all these things I'm feeling an authentic expression of my humanity? It's probably a yes. And you can say yes to that. Then maybe it gives you space to just take a deep breath and say, well, I'm living according to my values today. I'd like to do better tomorrow. I don't like feeling this way, but I was honest with myself and at least I'm being authentic with myself. And it is authentic sometimes to just have a bad day and not try and dress it up as something else. We have to give ourselves a little bit of grace. And I think we need a lot of resilience and a lot of humor in our lives so that we can sometimes laugh or not laugh as we're falling asleep. Maybe it doesn't feel funny yet, but just say, okay, I'm going to try and shake this off tomorrow and see if I can move myself into a better place. You're in alignment with your values. It's about ascribing significance and importance to what you value most. And if you value being real with yourself, and you value being human and being the most real human that you know to be and being as honest as you know to be. And if you value self-discovery and you say, wow, in my journey of self today, I discovered a territory that I didn't know was in me and it's dark and it's ugly and I don't like it at all, but it's something new or a new aspect of self, a new part of yourself for you to work with. Wonderful. You are in alignment with what you value and you can ascribe significance to that. And you can say, even though it was a bad day, I humaned as best I knew how, and I can be okay with that. So again, there are so many ways that we align with what we value, but it starts with changing inside of ourselves, and it starts with changing our relationship with ourselves. And it starts with creating a more holistic relationship with ourselves, where we really are trying to live in accordance with whatever foundational values we have mapped out as our cornerstone for the energy that we want to create from, the energy of what we want our essence to be, and the energy that we want to cultivate inside of us so we can move throughout the world as a more, again, whatever your values are, creative, authentic, loving, compassionate, gracious, humorous, warm expression of yourself, whatever those are. So I think this is a nice place to kind of tap into areas where we get stuck and fall off the path. These are kind of value traps, or maybe significant traps is a better way. Significance traps is a better way to call them. And these are the areas that many of us might fall into, where we get pulled into some other story, something that might not really align with what we have identified as our core values and our core reasons of being. But it's so easy because as a whole, mass consciousness or society seems to value these things. And I already touched on some of them. Like a good one is quantification. We live in a world right now where it seems like everything is measured. You can measure the amount of followers on a social media site. You can measure people get grades in school based on how they did, and percentage rates and numbers. We have things like salaries, and numbers are attached to that. We rank, we rate. There are so many ways that performance is evaluated in this world. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying any of that is bad. Much of it is just part of kind of how we've created things, and it can be helpful to have a sense of quantification. It helps us measure things. I think that when everybody gets a participation award, there can be wonderful things that come from that. At the same time, for those who, give a Olympic athlete or somebody a participation award, I think they'd say the participation is making it to the Olympics. Like what if they had an Olympic race and like everybody just got a gold medal because congratulations, she made it to the Olympics. We've created some of these systems for a reason. And some of them we might like more than others, just kind of based on who we are. But those things aren't necessarily bad. The problem is that if we fall into the ranking system all the time, or we fall into that system of buying into the quantification, it can be really hard on us. There's a lot of studies coming out right now about teens and social media, and just things like the amount of followers or likes or the stuff like that. I mean, it is uncharted territory right now that I personally did not have to go through as an adolescent. I'm in my 40s. Social media wasn't around. I think I got my first cell phone when I was in my mid 20s, maybe even closer to 30. It was just something that wasn't even a part of everyday life. And so there's a lot of interesting psychological studies starting to come out now that are really looking at the impact of what happens to teens on some of these online sites, especially when there's rankings and things like things that kind of tell you this person is somehow good and this person isn't. And, none of the findings are good. I mean, there's real self-esteem issues going on, and that's a whole other topic. But my point is that it's easy for many of us to fall into that. We have grown up in those systems. This world as a whole tends to be created in a way that right now, like ranking and quantification and all of that tends to be important. And sometimes quantity over quality is a direction that still sometimes things will go. And so that's an easy one to fall into. Comparison is probably the easiest one to fall into, where we compare ourselves to somebody else or their path. And this is so easy right now, again, because so much of the world is online. So I think comparison, like if we want to talk about a collective wound, like a collective karmic wound that is currently at play and being healed in collective consciousness, it is the comparison wound. You could also call that the self-esteem wound, but it is this woundedness that's come from people historically comparing to somebody else and saying, well, I don't measure up. I'm not as, fill in the blank, whatever it is you think that person has that you don't have as much. And a lot of coaches and like business entrepreneurs and people who do work in success mindsets and all that will often talk about the minute that you start comparing, that you are really getting into dangerous territory, because we're always going to find some place that we come up short. We're always going to find somebody who is either doing it better or who's achieved something. It is a lose-lose game, an absolute lose-lose game, but many of us fall into it. And then the other thing that I think is an easy trap to fall into with significance is kind of this idea of doing over being. And we live in a society that often values productivity, how much we get done in a day, how much we can do all at once, kind of being involved in all these different things. We award that. And for people who are doing things, we tend to say, look at them. They've really got it all together. They're doing this and they're doing this and they're involved in this. I don't know how they get their energy, but they just have really got it figured out. Well, do they? I don't know. For some people, they probably have a really high energetic rate and they tend to be big doers and they might be happiest when they're doing a lot. It doesn't mean that's the way for everybody. And it doesn't mean that's the only way of being in the world. And really, it is our act of being, who we are, like being in alignment with our values, just kind of our essence, like our act of being, not what we do, that is equally, if not more valuable than what we do. Part of living heart-centered in this world is to be in our hearts. And in order to be anchored into our hearts, that ask us to become love, to become compassion, to become acceptance, to become grace, to become light. We don't have to do these things perfectly, but when we're dialed into our hearts and we are really in coherence with their hearts, we become those things because those are the things our heart tends to value. And so when we become those things and we've really started to sort of patchwork this cloak of being together that is comprised of these beautiful patches of beautiful things, again, like love and compassion and acceptance and authenticity and all of those values that are so light-driven values, then the things that we do become an extension of that being. So our being is the thing that actually informs what we do. And when we're talking about redefining significance and living in a way where we are in alignment with ourselves, we have to know who we are. And who we are is this person of light, then what we do is created from that place, and it can change everything. It is the difference between living consciously and living mindfully versus kind of living according to some sort of dictate or standard that somebody else created. One of those ways of being in the world is heart-centered. It is authentic. It is true to the self that you were created to be and put here on the planet at this point in time with your unique light. And the other is being kind of part of the mass, part of the sheep, if you will. I like sheep, but sheep usually means like kind of this flock where everybody's doing the same thing and it goes unchallenged. And there's nothing wrong with things like if there's stuff that you like to do and lots of people like it, there's nothing wrong with buying into things that many, many people like, pumpkin spice latte in the fall. That's a win for me, and somebody can say, well, that's just really great marketing that a place like Starbucks did a long time ago. And they made it this thing. And now they're making a lot of money off of pumpkin spice lattes in the fall. I actually don't go to Starbucks. There's, I think, one on the island, and it's not anywhere close to where I'm at, but I do like pumpkin spice. And so I do have pumpkin spice seasoning. And when the fall comes, I love it when I can find pumpkin spice creamer and I can make the coffee. I'm very happy to be excited about fall and to fall in line with like everybody else out there who loves to embrace pumpkin spice lattes. It's not bad to do a trend or do what the masses are doing. These are not bad things. We're here for joy and pleasure. We're not always here to just be some contrarian who's bucking the system and saying, I don't buy into any of this because it was created by mass consciousness. It's not what that's about. It's just about making conscious decisions that are real and true to us. And sometimes those will fall in alignment with the trend or direction things are going. And sometimes it will run absolutely counterculture to the way things are going. And what really matters the most is your foundation and the roots of who you are at the core. The stuff that I mentioned is really just about personal interest and likes and those kinds of things. But if you want to run counterculture in the world, you're already doing so when you are really trying to live from a place of love and authenticity and integrity and truth. If the culture ran in that direction, we would see those values honored more. And the fact that we don't, and we see so much that's wrong in our system, says the system's got a lot of changing to do. So you're already being a grace rebel just by being in the light and working your light and being on the spiritual path. You are already being this like wild-hearted free spirit who says, I'm going to do it differently. And sometimes I'm going to engage with what others are doing. And other times I'm just going to like swim upstream and do my own thing and go my own way. No right or wrong to it. Again, this is about shifting to a place of living from a value-driven space where we are just in alignment with ourselves and our heart magic. So the last point that I want to make today about the redefinition of significance that is applicable to all of us, I think, is to not underestimate the impact of your light on the planet at this point in time. And I think that because this isn't necessarily taught, and maybe sometimes we throw around the phrase like, your light matters. But like, what does that actually mean? Your light matters. First of all, who you are matters. And, I just believe that if you're here for a reason and you're here for a purpose, or you wouldn't be here. Everything in creation has a purpose and has a reason, from the smallest thing to the biggest thing, and nothing is better than or worse than. It has a different purpose that it serves. So you have purpose. The fact that you're here tells me that. But what does it actually mean for your light to matter? So your light is your heart. Your light is you living in accordance with the light that is in you. When we live heart-centered, we live light-centered. When we are being our real self, our authentic self, we are living in our light. And our light actually makes quite a difference to the spaces that we inhabit. First of all, how do you think spirit works in the world? Now spirit's pretty capable, and there's a lot of different beings, if you will, that might comprise spirit, and spirit's certainly capable of not needing us to get things done down here on the planet. But really, spirit also moves through the hearts of humans. I'm making this podcast because it's in my heart to do so, but it's in my heart to do so because it is a culmination of some of my spiritual work, of feeling called to use my voice to teach on heart wisdom and how to live in accordance with our hearts. That is part of what I would consider my spiritual directive. I landed on the island of Kauai following this calling inside of me, inside of my heart. And, that is part of my spiritual directive. Our heart is our communication center with spirit. that is our gateway to really having a juicy relationship with the mysteries and a juicy relationship with spirit and whatever we'll say face of God or face of spirit that we feel called to engage with. Our heart is the portal that helps us have that wisdom and helps us have that understanding. Love is the universal language, not just, I didn't say like the earth language. I said the universal language. We can speak love to each other here on the planet. We speak it universally too. Love is our connection to our loved ones on the other side. It's our connection to the angels. It's our connection to spiritual energies. And that's all in the heart. Love is not a mind matter. That is a heart matter. So when you're in your heart and you are connected to your presence, whatever presence is for you, and you are following your heart, you are following spirit's guidance, and you are bringing the light of, how spirit wants to move through you onto the planet at this point in time. That's an extremely powerful thing. And it's not something to be taken lightly or to not be grateful for or to take for granted. That is a beautiful thing. And it is something that is really important. Can you imagine if everybody in this world made the shift into living from a heart-centered place? How different would the planet be? How different would it be if a bunch of people in a room who are in disagreement with each other could just get into their hearts? And maybe it doesn't change how they think about it. I didn't say get into their heads. I said get into their hearts. And how might the communication in a room filled with conflict where there's different sides with different opposing views, how might the communication shift if everybody in that room spoke from a heart-centered place and used their heart to inform their words instead of just having their opinions be based on what their mind knows? Do not underestimate the value of your heart and the value of the light in your heart. Something else that your light does is it helps anchor light onto the planet at this point in time. You are, if you want to think about it as a portal, that might feel like a fun word, kind of this walking ambassador of light. But, the earth herself is shifting. And last week, the Akashic Records talked about the soul of the earth and the beings who comprise the soul of the earth. And part of how we support her in that work is through our light. There is some interesting stuff going on. My friend and colleague, Virginia Mason Richardson, I've mentioned her on the podcast before. I'm going to bring her up again. She has a beautiful monthly offering called the Magic Guide. And she's got a paid membership, but she is so generous. She gives for free if you sign up. It's a 2-month newsletter on the new moon and the full moon. And she has this beautiful gift for working with spirit in many, many dimensions and understanding astrology, understanding asteroids. One of the coolest spiritual gifts I've heard of. And she's got a fun brain. I could go on and on about her, but it is really fun to read her work because she presents to you what synchronicity might look like. And she shares how she comes across some of the information she does. And so much of it is through paying attention and having her attention caught by something. And then she'll see maybe the same number repeat. And then she'll see it a third time. And that will guide her to go look it up and punch it into the asteroid chart. And then she'll find out that it represents asteroid, whatever it is. And she'll put that into a chart and find out that it's in conjunction on that day, on this particular full moon with where the moon is. And then she'll do some research on it and bring through like a beautiful story on like what that asteroid's about and the mythology behind it. And all these other synchronicities will come through that kind of confirm that she is meant to share this message and her work. Beautiful messages, beautiful work. And something that she has been talking about and writing about for a while in the Magic Guide, which I've been following for 3 years now, almost since she started it, maybe 4 years. however long it's been, is really about how the earth is shifting. And she's been talking about the electromagnetic field of the earth, the electromagnetic field of our hearts, and how the light in us and some things happening in our hearts that is helping sync with the earth and beat with the earth. And this isn't like a one-time thing that she's talked about. This story is ongoing. It is woven through each new moon cycle, each full moon cycle, each big cosmic cycle. Very beautiful work, especially if you are a deep thinker and you really want the information and really want to digest and chew on, like, what does this mean? I will put her information down in the write-up. It's the magic guide if you would like to access it. Anyways, she's done this work talking about our hearts and the earth, and that's really been echoed in some of the things that have come through in the Akashic in my own work, is this idea that as the electromagnetic field of the earth is shifting, as these energies are shifting underneath us, we are shifting, our hearts are shifting, the light inside of us is shifting. There is a relationship there. And while I can't pretend to tell you that I fully understand the relationship and can even put into language what it is, what I feel pretty confident saying that has been coming through on a spiritual level is that our light is helping with these shifts, and it does have an influence on the environment. So you are spirit's hands. Spirit moves through you, moves through your heart. You are also helping the earth with your light. And the last one that I wanted to say is that as you work your light and as you do things like heal your own wounds around significance, you are helping heal the collective wound right now. Collective wounds are healed through the individual. And one of the ways that we work with the traps that I mentioned that all of us can fall into, it is not to get into a self-righteous place and to say, oh, so-and-so over there is so involved right now in this, and oh, I'm so above that because I'm on the spiritual path. It's not to put other people down. It's not to make somebody wrong in order to make yourself right. It's not to, maybe you're somebody and you got super involved in popularity in whatever group that you were involved in, and feeling like somehow you had to be at the top. And maybe one of your soul lessons has been realizing that you might not have been meant to be part of that group. Maybe you were meant to take a different role in the group. Maybe the importance you hope to find there, you just didn't find, and you've made a break and you're kind of doing your own thing now, or you still have some contacts, but you just decided to go a different way. Working our light isn't looking back at that group and saying, well, they're all bad and wrong and they're so lost, and I've really found my authenticity and true path. It's not about making somebody else wrong. That's really hard to do. And it's very human for us to process thoughts, kind of those like wounded ego thoughts where we're like, well, I didn't need them anyways, the kinds of things that we sometimes tell ourselves. But as we really work our light and we really come into a space of being inside of our hearts, the hope is that we can kind of arrive at a place of just being able to say, you know what? They are their own souls and they're learning their own lessons through it. And some of them probably have karmic contracts with one another and things that they're working on with each other. And there's stuff that they're going to learn. And those aren't my lessons anymore. I chose to leave this, or I chose to go over here. And so I'm kind of in this new place now, and I don't need to make them wrong in order to know that where I'm at is right for me. And it just wasn't aligned. If something's not aligned, we don't have to feel self-righteous about it. We can just say that really wasn't in alignment with who I am, and just know that in our hearts. And that's really how we transmute some of these wounds. It's not about being better than, it's not about now we're comparing in the opposite way and somehow feeling more holy or more spiritual. It's not about that. When we're in that place, we're still really kind of feeding into that ego wound. We might need to be there for a little bit to kind of like lick our wounds if something upset us. But true healing and really transforming our light is coming to a place and just being able to say, ultimately, every soul here is on their own path. And they have their own complex reasons for being on the paths that they are on and creating the kinds of realities that they are creating. And sometimes we're meant to intersect with people for a while. Sometimes something simply isn't meant for us. And spirit's like, there is something better for you over here. You just don't know it. And sometimes we were just meant to learn something, and we're kind of meant to journey on and move and learn new lessons. Either way, we transform those wounds just through the art of self-acceptance and just being okay with where we're at and trying to let go in love and let go in forgiveness and release people to walk their own journey and be like, you know what? I forgive you for not meeting my expectations of you. And may I be forgiven that maybe I didn't meet your expectations of me. And may both of us just be blessed and guided to go on our way and journey towards peace and our light and our highest good. Blessed be. So, however we choose to do the work, when we fall into the old way, I call it the old story. And the old story is evaluating ourselves and our significance based on standards that are not in alignment with our values and that we didn't create. The new story is being in our hearts and making sure that we're aligning with our heart's values and knowing that if we are doing that, our significance is like gold star, spot on. Like we are living in accordance to what we value, and we're putting our attention to what we value and what matters. And when we do that, it offers healing, not just to ourselves, but we begin to bring that healing to every place we touch. The more healed we are, the more we bring that presence into every interaction. And that is just going to improve all of our interactions because we've changed. And on a collective karmic level, there's a wound that we help heal in the collective when we do that work. And I think that's very profound and beautiful and powerful. All right. That was all I had for today. And that feels like a really nice resting place for this podcast. So I am going to wrap up with that. And everybody gets a gold star who listened today, or we can make it silver. Gold's an arbitrary color. You get a rainbow star. Rainbow's my favorite color. So rainbow stars for everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your light. Coming up next week, we are talking about the topic, the art of transformation. And we are going to be looking at ideas around personal transformation. How do we work with anything in our lives and use that in a transformative way? And when we talk about like the topic today, where we talked about this last bit, healing our own wounds and kind of bringing light into those places. How do we use our transformation to ultimately transmute any pain in our life into some form of light? How do we use destructive energies that might come into our life and destructive situations and things that might feel dark, and constructively work with them and use that to come out of it like even stronger, shinier, more rainbowy, and like rise like the phoenix? So we are going to be looking at how we do that and ideas around that. That will be coming up next week on episode 14 of Your Heart Magic. So until then, have a beautiful week and be well, be love, be you, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.